Halloween is supposed to be a night of fun, costumes, and celebration. But in Tampa's Ybor City, the night turned into absolute chaos. The streets were packed with people, music was blasting, and the energy was high, until suddenly, gunshots rang out. Screams filled the air. People ran for their lives. Some hit the ground, trying to dodge bullets, while others lay motionless, caught in the crossfire. Police rushed to the scene, sirens blaring, as the night of festivities became a crime scene. 2 young lives were lost, 18 others were left bleeding, and now, the entire city is demanding answers. Who pulled the trigger? What sparked this deadly shooting? And could this massacre have been prevented? Gang tensions, reckless gunplay, and innocent bystanders caught in the middle. This is the tragic story of the Tampa Halloween shooting. Let's break down everything we know. The streets of Ybor City, Tampa, Florida, were buzzing with excitement on the night of October 29, 2023. It was the weekend before Halloween, one of the most highly anticipated nights of the year. Thousands of people had gathered in the historic district, known for its lively nightlife, clubs, and vibrant party scene. Many were dressed in elaborate costumes, enjoying the festivities, posing for pictures, and making memories. Bars and restaurants were packed, music was blasting from every corner, and the energy in the air was electric. But just as the night was winding down and the early hours of the morning crept in, that joyful atmosphere would be shattered. At around 3 a.m., a heated argument broke out, and within seconds, gunfire rang out, turning what had been a celebration into a bloodbath. The shooting was not random. It stemmed from an ongoing rivalry between 2 groups. A No Hesitation Committee, NHC, K4K, Kill for Kamari. These groups, both known for their street ties, had been embroiled in an ongoing feud, and that night, tensions boiled over. Witnesses reported seeing members of both groups arguing loudly near 7th Avenue, a popular strip in Ybor City lined with clubs and bars. Some people thought it was just another heated exchange, something that might escalate into a shoving match or, at worst, a fistfight. But as the argument became more aggressive, one of the men reached for a gun. Before anyone could react, multiple shots were fired. The sound of gunfire ripped through the crowd like a lightning strike. What had been a carefree night immediately turned into panic as partygoers screamed, ducked, and ran for their lives. Some people initially froze in shock, unsure if what they had heard was real. But as more shots rang out, the reality set in. This wasn't just a random fight. This was a deadly shootout. People began sprinting in every direction, some diving behind cars, others knocking over tables and chairs in restaurants as they searched for safety. Witnesses described the sheer terror of seeing bodies drop to the ground, some wounded, some lifeless. I was just standing there, laughing with my friends, and then, boom, boom, boom. I didn't even know where the shots were coming from, one witness recalled. I just ran. Another bystander, who had been live-streaming the night on social media, captured the terrifying moment when the shots rang out. The video showed dozens of people in costume, fleeing in panic, some tripping and falling as they tried to escape the gunfire. When the smoke cleared, the aftermath was devastating. The shooting had claimed 2 lives and left at least 16 others injured. Among the dead was 14-year-old Elijah Wilson. Just a teenager, Elijah had his whole life ahead of him. He wasn't a known gang member. He was just a kid caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. His family would later describe him as a bright, loving young boy, full of dreams, who had no idea his life would end that night. Also killed was 20-year-old Harrison Bunstoppel, a young man whose promising future was stolen in an instant. Whether he was directly involved in the argument or simply an innocent bystander remains unclear, but his loss added to the heartbreak of the night. The other 16 victims, ranging from teenagers to adults, were rushed to nearby hospitals, some in critical condition. Many of them had been struck by stray bullets, their injuries a grim reminder of just how indiscriminate gun violence can be. The investigation into the Ybor City Halloween shooting was swift but complex, as authorities worked to piece together the sequence of events that led to the deadly violence. In the immediate aftermath, law enforcement officials were met with a chaotic scene. Victims lying injured on the pavement, terrified partygoers still scrambling for safety, and a flood of conflicting witness statements. However, within hours, the Tampa Police Department had their first suspect in custody, 22-year-old Tyrell Stephen Phillips. Phillips was arrested at the scene, reportedly still holding a firearm when officers arrived. According to initial reports, He was involved in the altercation that led to the shooting, though his exact role remained unclear in the first hours of the investigation. As police interrogated him, Phillips claimed self-defense, insisting that he had only fired his weapon to protect himself from an imminent threat. However, multiple witness accounts and video footage contradicted this claim. While some bystanders reported seeing Phillips being confronted by a group of men, surveillance cameras painted a different picture, one where he was actively engaging in the conflict rather than simply trying to escape it. Authorities quickly determined that his self-defense claim would not hold up under scrutiny, leading to charges of second-degree murder and felon in possession of a firearm. As investigators continued their work, it became clear that Phillips was not the only shooter that night. Ballistics evidence from the scene revealed that multiple firearms had been discharged, meaning at least one more gunman had been involved. This discovery launched a broader manhunt for additional suspects. Days after the shooting, police announced the arrests of 14-year-old Caden Abney and 21-year-old Dwayne Tillman Jr. in connection with the attack. Their involvement sent shockwaves through the community, not only because it pointed to a coordinated effort behind the violence, but also because of Abney's young age, just 14 years old. Abney had become one of the youngest suspects in a mass shooting in recent Tampa history. Law enforcement officials stated that he was seen brandishing a firearm during the altercation and had allegedly fired shots at the opposing group. While his exact role in the deaths of Elijah Wilson and Harrison Bunstapel remained under investigation, prosecutors wasted no time in charging him as an adult due to the severity of the crime. Tillman Jr., a 21-year-old with known affiliations to one of the involved groups, was also taken into custody. Authorities linked him to the shooting based on witness testimonies, social media evidence, and physical evidence recovered from the crime scene. He faced multiple charges, including attempted murder, aggravated battery, and unlawful possession of a firearm. Even with these three suspects in custody, police remained convinced that at least one more shooter was still at large. They urged the public to come forward with any information, emphasizing that justice would not be fully served until everyone involved in the violence was held accountable. The heart of the shooting was an alleged gang rivalry between two factions. A No Hesitation Committee, NHC, K4K, Kill for Kamari. These groups had been feuding for months, their tensions fueled by past altercations, territorial disputes, and a series of escalating threats on social media. The digital world had become a breeding ground for violence, with members of both gangs frequently posting taunts, threats, and videos flaunting firearms. Investigators believe that this online hostility played a significant role in heightening tensions before the fatal confrontation in Ybor City. In the weeks leading up to the shooting, there had been multiple warning signs that the conflict between NHC and K4K was intensifying. Law enforcement sources revealed that both groups had been involved in previous altercations across Tampa, some of which had already resulted in violence. However, authorities had struggled to intervene, as many of these disputes remained underground and difficult to track until they exploded into public settings, like the one on Halloween night. On the night of the shooting, members of both groups crossed paths in Ybor City, and what started as a verbal argument quickly spiraled into gunfire. Witnesses reported hearing shouting and threats before the first shots were fired, and once the shooting began, the situation became uncontrollable. Investigators believe that more than one firearm was used, further complicating the case and making it more difficult to determine who fired the fatal shots that killed Wilson and Bunstapel. One of the most alarming aspects of the incident was how easily firearms made their way into such a densely populated area. Ybor City, known for its heavy police presence and security measures, was hosting thousands of Halloween revelers, yet multiple individuals were able to carry and discharge weapons in the middle of a crowd. This raised serious concerns about gun accessibility and enforcement in Florida. Despite existing laws against illegal firearm possession, it was clear that these measures had not been enough to prevent deadly weapons from reaching the hands of dangerous individuals, some of whom were underage. Authorities later revealed that at least one of the weapons recovered from the scene had been obtained illegally, either through the black market or a straw purchase, where someone legally buys a gun and then hands it off to a prohibited person. The case reignited debates about Florida's gun laws, the role of gang culture in firearm accessibility, and the lack of effective intervention programs for at-risk youth. As investigators continued to build their case, Tampa residents mourned the victims and demanded justice. Vigils were held in honor of Elijah Wilson and Harrison Bunstapel, with community members emphasizing the need for action against rising gun violence. While 3 suspects were already in custody, police maintained that the case was far from closed. They continued to pursue leads on the remaining suspect, hoping to ensure that everyone responsible for the Halloween massacre was brought to justice. The Ybor City shooting was yet another grim reminder of the deadly consequences of gang violence and the ease with which firearms can end up in the wrong hands. The case left many questioning. How many more lives must be lost before real change is made? The Ybor City Halloween shooting sent waves of panic through the crowded streets as gunfire erupted in the early hours of October 29, 2023. What had been a night of celebration quickly turned into a scene of terror and bloodshed, with partygoers scrambling for cover, some ducking behind cars, others fleeing into nearby bars and clubs. Witnesses described the moment as pure chaos, with the sound of gunshots cutting through the music and laughter, leaving many unsure of where the danger was coming from or when it would stop. Within minutes, police sirens and emergency vehicle lights flooded the district, as Tampa police officers, paramedics, and first responders rushed to the scene. Law enforcement officers, already stationed in Ybor City due to the large Halloween festivities, quickly moved in to secure the area, assist victims, and begin investigating the cause of the violence. Some of the injured were treated on site, while others were rushed to nearby hospitals, their conditions ranging from minor injuries to life-threatening wounds. Bystanders captured shocking footage of the aftermath. People screaming, victims lying on the ground as others tried to render first aid, and officers frantically working to establish order. The scene was a war zone in the middle of a historic nightlife district, and as the news broke, the entire city of Tampa was left in shock and mourning. In the days following the shooting, grieving families of the victims stepped forward, expressing their heartbreak, frustration, and anger over the senseless violence. The parents of 14-year-old Elijah Wilson, one of the two killed, were devastated that their son had lost his life in what should have been a fun, carefree night. "He was just a kid," his mother said in a tearful interview. "He had his whole life ahead of him, and now he's gone because of someone else's reckless actions." The family of 20-year-old Harrison Bunstoppel, the other fatality, also demanded justice and accountability. Bunstoppel had no known connection to the gang dispute that led to the shooting. He was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. His loved ones described him as a hard-working, kind young man who was looking forward to his future. For the families of the wounded, the pain was also unbearable. Many of the 16 injured survivors faced long recoveries, both physically and emotionally. Some would have to undergo multiple surgeries, while others were left with psychological trauma from witnessing the horror unfold before their eyes. Parents of young victims, some as young as 17, called for stronger measures to prevent youth from being caught up in violent crime. In the wake of the tragedy, city officials, law enforcement, and community leaders scrambled to address concerns about public safety and prevent another incident of this scale from happening again. The immediate priority was ensuring that Ybor City, one of Tampa's most popular nightlife destinations, was safe for visitors. Tampa authorities increased police patrols in Ybor City in the days following the shooting, particularly on weekends and during major events. There were discussions about implementing stricter security measures, such as a stronger police presence on foot and in patrol cars, or installing more surveillance cameras to monitor high-risk areas, using metal detectors at certain entry points in nightlife areas, introducing a curfew or designated safety zones to prevent loitering and gang activity. Local businesses, especially bars and clubs, voiced concerns over safety protocols, some even questioning whether they should hire additional private security to protect patrons from future violent outbreaks. The tragedy sparked a heated debate about whether Tampa should impose stricter regulations on nightlife venues. Ybor City is well known for its vibrant late-night scene, with clubs and bars staying open until 3 a.m. or later. Some city officials argued that late-night hours contributed to the violence, as more intoxicated individuals, gang members, and armed individuals stayed out on the streets, increasing the likelihood of altercations escalating. Proposals included earlier closing times for bars and clubs, stricter ID checks to prevent underage individuals from accessing certain areas, more coordination between club owners and law enforcement to report suspicious activity. However, business owners pushed back, arguing that reducing hours would harm the city's nightlife economy and punish responsible patrons for the actions of a few criminals. Many insisted that the issue wasn't the nightlife itself, but rather the unchecked flow of illegal firearms and the lack of intervention in rising gang conflicts. Perhaps the biggest takeaway from the Ybor City shooting was the urgent conversation about gun violence and youth involvement in crime. The fact that a 14-year-old was arrested for firing a weapon during the attack raised serious concerns about how easily young people are gaining access to firearms. Community activists, local politicians, and anti-violence organizations demanded action, calling for a stronger gun control measures, including closing loopholes that allow illegal gun purchases, a more funding for youth intervention programs to keep at-risk teens away from gang recruitment, a tougher penalties for illegal firearm possession, especially for those involved in violent crime, educational programs in schools to raise awareness about gun violence and gang prevention. Activists emphasized that police crackdowns alone wouldn't solve the problem. The city needed long-term solutions that addressed the root causes of gang violence, including poverty, lack of job opportunities, and the glorification of street life on social media. As Tampa mourned the victims, the Ybor City shooting became a flashpoint in the larger conversation about gun violence in America. Residents gathered for candlelight vigils, holding signs that read, "Enough is enough," and "Stop the violence." Social media was flooded with messages of grief, frustration, and calls for reform. While authorities worked to track down the remaining suspects still at large, the community was left asking, how many more innocent lives must be lost before real change happens? Will new safety measures be enough to prevent another tragedy? And most importantly, what can be done to stop young people from turning to gun violence in the first place? The Ybor City shooting was not just another tragic incident. It was a wake-up call that shook an entire community to its core. What should have been a night of festivities and celebration turned into a scene of chaos, bloodshed, and heartbreak. In the aftermath, the city of Tampa found itself grappling with tough questions. How did things escalate so quickly? Who should be held accountable? Could this have been prevented? As the investigation unfolded, authorities moved swiftly, arresting multiple suspects linked to the violence. Among them was Tyrell Stephen Phillips, a 22-year-old who claimed self-defense, arguing that he only pulled the trigger because his life was in danger. But was this a legitimate defense or just a convenient excuse? The evidence suggested that the situation was far more complicated than it first appeared. Meanwhile, 14-year-old Caden Abney and 21-year-old Dwayne Tillman Jr. were also taken into custody, both facing serious charges that could alter their lives forever. Even more chilling was the revelation that at least one more suspect remained at large, raising fears that the full truth had yet to be uncovered. But what really led to this deadly confrontation? Authorities pointed to an ongoing gang rivalry between the No Hesitation Committee, NHC, and K4K, Kill for Kamari, two groups with a history of violent conflicts. The tension between them had been brewing for months, if not years, and social media had become the battleground where threats, insults, and challenges were exchanged like gunfire long before that fateful night. Posts showcasing gang affiliations, weapons, and taunts flooded Instagram, Snapchat, and TikTok, turning online disputes into real-world bloodshed. But beyond the gang warfare, a bigger question loomed. How did firearms end up in the hands of these young men in such a crowded public place? Despite security efforts in nightlife districts, guns continued to slip through the cracks, making violent escalations almost inevitable. This raised concerns about lax gun laws, inadequate security measures, and a culture where settling disputes with bullets had become disturbingly normalized. As families mourned and the city of Tampa searched for answers, the legal battle was just beginning. Each suspect faced serious charges, and the stakes were incredibly high. Tyrell Phillips, the man at the center of the controversy, was charged with second-degree murder, aggravated assault, and unlawful possession of a firearm. If convicted, he could face life in prison, but his legal team was determined to argue that Florida's Stand Your Ground law protected him. This law, infamous for its broad interpretation, allows individuals to use deadly force if they believe their life is in imminent danger. But was Phillips truly acting in self-defense, or was he a willing participant in a deadly gunfight? Prosecutors weren't convinced. They argued that self-defense does not apply when someone voluntarily places themselves in a dangerous situation. The 14-year-old suspect, Caden Abney, was another major focus of the case. Despite his young age, he was charged as an adult, facing decades behind bars if convicted. Was this a fair punishment, or was the system failing another teenager who had been pulled into a life of violence too soon? These questions sparked intense debate, with some calling for harsher penalties and others arguing for rehabilitation instead of incarceration. But this case was about more than just 3 suspects and a single night of violence. It was about a larger issue plaguing urban nightlife areas across the country. In cities like Chicago, Miami, and Atlanta, shootings outside bars and clubs have become alarmingly common, turning places of entertainment into danger zones. The combination of alcohol, crowds, and simmering tensions often led to violent escalations, and Ybor City was now another tragic example. But perhaps most disturbing was the role of social media in fueling real-world violence. Investigators uncovered how members of NHC and K4K had been exchanging threats online for weeks, with videos, comments, and messages egging each other on until it inevitably boiled over. How many other conflicts were playing out in this same way, unnoticed until it was too late? Experts warn that social media has become a dangerous amplifier for violence, allowing small disputes to explode into deadly encounters. So what can be done to prevent the next tragedy? Some believe the answer lies in stricter gun laws, arguing that tighter background checks and harsher penalties for illegal firearm possession could reduce access to deadly weapons. Others call for increased security in nightlife districts, such as mandatory metal detectors, more police patrols, and earlier closing hours. But many argue that these measures only address the symptoms, not the root cause. True prevention, they say, starts with youth intervention programs, mentorship initiatives, and efforts to steer young people away from gang involvement before violence becomes a way of life. But is the system really willing to invest in these solutions? Or will the cycle of violence continue unchecked? And that brings us back to the central question. Could this tragedy have been avoided? 2 young lives were lost, their families shattered, and an entire community left to grieve and wonder what could have been done differently. Is justice truly being served? Are the right people being held accountable? And most importantly, how do we stop this from happening again? Now, it's time to hear from you. Do you believe the suspects are being charged appropriately? Should self-defense be accepted in this case? What solutions do you think could help curb gun violence in urban areas? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more deep dives into true crime cases like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because awareness is the first step toward change.